We are reading a piece by Robert Freeman. The U.S. is facing a Weimar moment, his reference being what happened to Germany after World War I, when it found itself in a financial condition that brought about the rise of the right-wing Nazis, even though it had been the right wing that had destroyed the country. And the comparison he's making here is between the situation in Weimar, Germany, and in 1919, and the situation in the United States in 2009. 90-year separation, and the comparison is not exact and in perfect equilibrium, but his points are certainly well thought out and well stated here. What he's saying is, let me back up just a sentence or two. So what is the right-wing response to everything that has collapsed under Republican stewardship? They have adopted the strategy and tactics of the failed right-wing plotters of Weimar Germany. First, stoke the resentment of the population about the increasingly dire state of its living conditions, no matter that those conditions were created by the very right-wing oligarchs who now pretended to befriend the little guy. Rage is rage. Once catalyzed, it is easy to turn on any subject. Second, prevent the new government from succeeding in any meaningful endeavor. The Republicans have set all their efforts to doing everything they can to make sure the Obama administration fails. Rush Limbaugh's infamous "I hope he fails" pronouncement is only the beginning of the fomenting of hatred from the right. As Limbaugh said, quote, "Let's be honest, every Republican in America is hoping for Obama's failure," end quote. The same malignant hope oozes unadulterated from all the other dogpatch demagogues that rent themselves out to the Republican Party to foment resentment against anything liberal. Joe the Plumber, Rick Santelli, Glenn Beck, Michael Savage, Ann Coulter, and virtually every other right-wing nut operative whose intellectual stock and trade has been vaporized by the collision of right-wing policies with objective reality. Equally so for the so-called respectable members of the party. The all but 3 Republican members of Congress who refused to sign on to Obama's first stimulus package and continued to grandstand against every effort toward any form of progress. Contrition for their own abject failure, humility for their destructive hubris, compassion for their crippled country, those have nothing to do with it. All they possess is a blinding, visceral hatred of the left and a masturbatory lust for the return to power. But what else can they do? Bereft of ideas, bankrupt in ideology, architects of collapse, obstruction is all they have. If Obama is successful, it will not only advertise the full extent of their failure, it will provide a model of liberal governance that would render Republicans irrelevant for decades, much as FDR's success left them out in the political cold for an entire generation. Liberal failure is a matter of life and death for Republicans. And it's not all that clear that the liberals won't fail. No one should underestimate the task at hand. Never before, not even during the Great Depression, has the country inherited such a daunting and tractable set of economic problems. A debt burden so crushing, inequality so vast, a loss of financial sovereignty so constricting, an intellectual edifice so bankrupt, a private economy so uncompetitive, or an opposition so callously self-interested in its own recovery and so cavalierly disinterested in the nation's. The economy has been so damaged. Successful rescue requires threading a series of policy needles, each of them so complex in their own right that none could be solved by any administration of the past 50 years. This includes rehabilitating and re-regulating the nation's banking system, restructuring health care, reducing national dependence on oil, reviving manufacturing so as to reduce the trade deficit, rebuilding the nation's crumbling infrastructure, dealing with a soaring national debt, trying to resuscitate a collapsing housing market, and all the while maintaining the safety net under 77 million baby boomers entering retirement with a net worth 60% what it was only 18 months ago. Success will require much more than luck, hard work, brilliant policy, or soaring rhetoric. It will require cooperation and contribution from every American. It is those two offerings, cooperation and contribution, that Republicans are intent on withholding, the better to ensure Obama's failure. Simply put, the Republicans hate Democrats more than they love America. And if they succeed in derailing Obama's efforts, the cost will be incalculable. After World War I, one of the consequences of the liberal government's failure was Adolf Hitler. Hitler had a genius for exploiting the resentment of the German people for their condition. More than 80% of the Nazi Party's members were unemployed. It was these legions of idle thugs who made up the ranks of Hitler's brown shirt militia, the SA. The right-wing oligarchy that had set out from the beginning to destroy the Weimar Republic recognized the potency of resentment and Hitler's genius at exploiting it. It was they who sponsored Hitler's ascension to chancellor in 1933. Resentment and obstruction are all the right wing in America have to peddle. Their policies are utterly discredited. Their ideology, even by its own standards, is a sham. They are so bereft of leaders. Their de facto leader is a former drug-addicted, thrice-divorced radio talk show host. That is literally the best they can muster. But they have built a national franchise inciting the downwardly mobile to blame the government, not the right, for their problems, exactly as Hitler did in the 1920s. The Republican propensity for fascism must not be underestimated. Witness their phony justifications for the war in Iraq, fanning the flames of nationalistic aggression, just as Hitler did with Austria, the Sudetenland, Czechoslovakia, and Poland in the 1930s. Consider their symbiotic embrace of corporate interests in the oil, weapons, telecommunications, pharmaceutical, finance, and other industries, the same type of corporate interests that sponsored Hitler's ascent to power. Look at their efforts to dismantle civil liberties with the Patriot Act and the Military Commissions Act, or the relentless, pervasive propaganda laundered through their corporate-owned right-wing media machine. These are the classic hallmarks of fascism. The strategy is to obstruct recovery, facilitate collapse, and then incite the faux populism of public resentment to reinstall a corporatist oligarchy which has failed, but which will not abide a reduction of its privileges or a diminution of its control. It is a fetid, seditious agenda, awaiting only its own latter-day mustachioed messiah for its final fulfillment. World War I was a once-in-a-millennium upset in the architecture of global power. In 4 years, it shifted the center of that power from Europe to the United States. But failure now by the United States will shift that center once again from the United States to China, out of the Western world where it has resided for the past 500 years. The psychic shock to the billion-odd people living in Western civilization with its liberal democracies, capitalist economies, and Enlightenment ideas will be incalculable, irretrievable. The shift may be inevitable, and only a matter of time. It is quite possible that the damage inflicted on the Western world's economy by rapacious Republicans is already beyond repair, but it will be tragedy beyond measure if such a shift is consummated by the very wrecking crew that took us down the road to ruin, all the while so unctuously proclaiming patriotism as its crowning ideal. They are not patriots, and their goal is not the revival of American power. It is the revival of their own power, even at the expense of America's. They represent a very dangerous threat to the nation's future. Robert Freeman.